welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm very excited today to be joined by my friend Andrew Davison. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Good. Hey, Jordan. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great getting to know you over the years of this crazy cannabis industry we're both working in.
Yeah, it's quite a ride, isn't it? It's
It
unlike
really
anything
is.
I've done before, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So you've definitely seen the ups and downs of the industry with your time running Longplay. And so I'd love to just kick it off and learn a little bit more about your personal history and your career history and how you ended up deciding to make the leap into cannabis.
Yeah, that's a funny story. I was never really intending to go into cannabis. I had kind of a traditional background of getting an MBA in strategy and marketing. I had a long history in the outdoor space as a Knowles instructor and so forth. So I combined those two and went into the outdoor industry originally and got involved in traditional CPG and really cut my teeth in that industry, in the bike industry in particular. I was part of a private equity turnaround and had a great mentor and just went on from there. Got involved in my first startup, a technology startup, which we pulled together in Boulder, sort of 2000 to '08, and that was a fun ride, a lot of success. And then we sold that to a global ad agency and did a term with them for a while,
Mhm.
uh, and really learned on the technology innovation and the creative side. I mean, that was so cool to work with such smart creatives doing really, really cutting edge work with Fortune 50 companies and yeah, and then from there got recruited into the public company side and was the first CMO of Crocs. And that was also pretty interesting. Had an opportunity to kind of help unify that brand around one message, one focus. And again, just worked with so many smart people. And that's really, I think, the key. And I was a public company executive, and I was in the midst of that realm. I'd moved on to another local company, Gaiam, which is a great company, fitness products. And I received a crazy phone call from someone I never met and said, "Hey, we're pulling together a team of folks we want to talk to about the cannabis industry. Are you interested?" And my my first response was no, no thanks. so, but it was a financer, and I got on the phone with him, and he was a pretty impressive guy, and we had a good conversation. And he said, if you were going to go into the space, what would you do? And that was the beginning of the conversation.
Wow.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
how did you respond to that question?
Well, I kind of reiterated. He said to me, he said, "Look, I want to build a national cannabis company. I want it to be, sort of like Anheuser-Busch, follow the rules, and I want to use Willie Nelson." And I said, "Okay, well, that's a lot." He said, "So how would you approach that?" And in my background, everything is really around quantitative data and understanding what consumer behavior and preferences are based on how how they're expressing themselves in the market, and then following that data, and then overlaying that quantitative data with a bunch of qualitative data. So, what's the psychographics and how are they behaving relative to the data? And so I kind of just walked him through that. And I said, this is how I would approach it. He said, "Great. I love it. How about we have lunch in LA?" And so I went and we had lunch, and he, put a proposition in front of me that I couldn't refuse. And the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk to us about Willie Nelson. How did you all get connected to him and what's been his history with
Right.
cannabis?
Well, Willie's an incredible man. I'll just say that. It's been an honor to get to know him. And that's been one of the most incredible aspects or rewarding aspects, I should say, of this whole journey. So when I met with this investor, he said, "I want to do it with Willie Nelson." So I assumed he had Willie. And after we had our meeting, he said, "Okay, so now you need to go down to Texas and meet with Willie and his family for, a few days and spend a few days down there and see if you guys, are simpatico. And if so, then we'll get going." I said, "Well, wait a minute. I thought you'd already taken care of it." I said, "No, no, no. I'll give you the ironclad intro, so they'll take you seriously, but the rest is up to you guys." So, I had some folks
The
that
closing.
yeah, it was exactly. It's up to you. I had some folks I've worked with before in different, capacities. And so I kind of called a little kitchen team together, and we were all pretty psyched, as you can imagine. And so we put together a quick strategy and a plan and a bunch of thoughts. And we flew down, three of us to Texas and met with Willie. And we spent Willie and Annie and his sons in particular, and some of his management team. But we spent 4 days with them, and we were at Austin City Limits, and we were on the Jimmy Kimmel show with him, backstage, of course. But we got to really get the whole experience of his life. And what we realized later was a 4-day job interview. He was kind of checking us out, and he'd had a lot of people, as you suspect, come through and promise the world about cannabis and different
Yeah.
thoughts. it's a tricky space, as we found out. And he was looking for folks that, regardless of where things went, he could trust. And I think that's, what we established while we were down there was a real bond of trust. And they're just an incredible group of people. I mean, they have a funny saying when you walk in, their mantra on the ranch is no assholes. So, and that's really sort of where you start. So after 4 days, Willie stuck out his hand, said, "I'm going to work with you guys." And that was the beginning of an incredible relationship.
Wow. And so for folks who aren't as familiar with his history, I mean, would love to hear like what Willie's involvement in cannabis was before it started to get legalized and his advocacy work.
Yeah, Willie has been a muse and a messenger and an advocate for cannabis his whole life. And long before cannabis was even part of the national dialogue, it was tapped into his creativity, his culture, and his sort of lifestyle. And he said early on, he said, "I've never understood why there's a limitation in cannabis or hemp. It's in the Bible, and it is, right? They talk about it." And so that was his orientation. He also lives by the mantra of he doesn't like to tell people what to do. He likes to give people options, and I think his view has always been that cannabis should be legal, and that it has beneficial components to it that are being overlooked. And he had that philosophy long before it was really fashionable. There was a book in the early 70s called "The Emperor Wears No Clothes," and it kind of galvanized the core cannabis advocacy and community. And he was part of that crew early on. So his personal journey is one that kind of just exemplifies that. I could never even come close to expressing it, but he grew up in a tough environment on a dirt floor in Texas, and he went into the Air Force, and then he went into country music, and all along the way he was part of that culture, and part of that culture was a lot of drinking and smoking and hard partying, etc. And at one point, Willie, as the story goes, took out a pack of Chesterfields and was like, "What am I doing?" And he dumped out the Chesterfields and he rolled up a bunch of joints and he put it all joints in there and he put the Chesterfields back in his pocket. So now whenever he wanted to reach for a cigarette, instead he reached for a joint and smoke a joint. And that's what helped him get off cigarettes. And then he also started to realize, hey, he tapered off the alcohol too. And, as Willie tells it, he says, I became a much nicer, gentler person by getting off the alcohol, getting off the cigarettes. I became healthier. And so he credits cannabis to really a significant turnaround in his quality of life and his health and his temperament, and it's kind of cool. And I love the Chesterfield story. So, so since that time, because of his personal story and then his beliefs, I mean, he's been a hard, continuous advocate for cannabis. And there's just legendary stories of his breaking the rules and skirting the line and getting away with it because he was Willie Nelson. But his, unlike a lot of folks who kind of came to cannabis because of their personal use or just because of the last 10, 15, 20 years, this is a guy it's been part of his story since the 60s.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. And when I moved to Colorado, I think the first time I ever saw a pack of pre-rolls like that was your guys' Willie's. So it's cool to know how authentic that form factor is.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because after some of the original meetings, Willie's got an incredible team around him, and that's part of the benefit. It's not this huge entourage, a couple of really core people, and one of those folks is his manager, Mark Rothbaum, who's just a really impressive guy. And Mark and I were talking, and he said, we got to get a pack of Willies out to the market. This is long before we'd even put together any of our funding or anything. So but that was the quick meaning, a pack of Willies. So that was always part of our true north. And to your point, we've always had a pack of Willies in some form on market.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue to hear about how did things actually play out once you got Willie on board and got Longplay up and running.
Right. Well, we started this early on. We were consultants in 2014 and kind of put the business plan together. We brought the company together in 15 and started a fundraising and raised a bunch of funding through a private equity group out of New York, et cetera. And we launched in 16, right around August 16. So we closed our funding in 15, spent the first 8 months of 16 getting things ready, and then put product out. And it's sort of a soft launch, if you will, to kind of just get the water through the pipes. And then we hit the ground hard in 17. And really, from the moment we came to market, the response has been consistent. People really resonate with the brand. And I think, we can talk about how all the great work from the people in our team to create that brand that people responded to, because that's a whole separate conversation. But when we went into market and when we approached it, people responded to it. They knew Willie's story, and he was someone that, when we did the research, I kind of skipped over that. One of the things we saw is that Willie was a universal. It didn't matter what state you were in. It doesn't matter what age, what gender, what your political affiliation. Everybody can galvanize and align with Willie. And in fact, in the years I've been working with them, everybody I meet has a Willie story. It's really, really interesting. So he's a guy that cuts across all aisles. And there's a reason there used to be signs that said Willie for president, and it would have been funny if he'd gone that way. So, he really immediately resonated for all the reasons we talked about. And then we came out into market in 16. We launched in Colorado and Washington. And back in that day, the speculation was that the industry was going to mature and evolve and grow in an entirely different fashion than what has actually happened. And as we all know, Trump came in 16. Jeff Sessions ripped up the Cole memo, and that put everything sort of in a state of limbo. And I think we've really been there since, honestly. And the industry has continued to grow and evolve. And of course, Trump again in 18 with the Farm Bill stirred up the industry and, sort of set off another wave of evolution. But other than those two moves, it's been sort of static. And so, coming out of traditional consumer products, and I think like a lot of people with my background, we thought that the industry would evolve once we got the regulatory framework in place over 3 to 5 years. And then we'd start to pursue a traditional CPG type model, and of course, far from it is where we've gone since then. So we entered into the industry like lots of people with one thesis, and then we evolved and we've pivoted. And in fact, we've had to continue to pivot to continue to find those sweet spots and grow over the last 7 or 8 years. And the one thing, though, that has been consistent is the brand. I mean, at this point, almost 600 million at retail of Willie's products sold across all categories. Just wow. The consumers just resonate. If it's put in market and it's marketed properly, people really gravitate towards it. So it's been exciting, but the industry itself has been a challenge, but the brand and working with Willie and working with consumers has been really rewarding and exciting.
Wow, that's great. And so what are some of the SKUs that you found to be more resonant for Willie's?
Right. Well, traditionally, because you hit on it, we started with that pack of Willies, and the philosophy back in that time, particularly early on, was good high quality flour and good high quality pre-rolls, and those were sort of the heritage form factors coming out of the old industry, right? And so Willie aligned with that. So of course, when we started, we went into that product category, and then like the rest of the industry, we quickly evolved into vapes and edibles and other form factors. And what's interesting at this point now, and I just had this conversation recently, we've put product in just about every form factor you can imagine. And again, it comes down to quality product and quality delivery with the trust of the brand. So as long as we're aligning the product and the delivery to the brand trust that we've created and that people expect based on Willie, it wins. It really does win. So, but categories that have been great for us are pre-rolls. We've been a leader in pre-rolls. Vape, we've been a leader in vape. We've had good success with gummies, but it's been difficult to get sort of critical scale. We've got some exciting stuff going on that front now, so I'm looking forward to it. And one of the areas that I always wanted to push into early on, starting in 18, was beverage. And beverage is an interesting one because it's difficult because of the logistics and the weight and the distribution, et cetera. And then you can't have centralized manufacturing in the marijuana space. It really becomes prohibitive. But again, that's the industry structure. But when I looked at the consumer behavior, it was really clear that there's an opportunity for what we call the third cooler. At the backyard picnic, you've got your alternative, you've got your beer and wine, you've got your sodas and water, and now you have your cannabis cooler. And of course, that's what's evolved. And I believe that beverage is going to continue to drive the way in all forms of cannabis, particularly as the industry normalizes. But it's what we're familiar with. It's how we're social. It's how we spend time together. Whether it's coffee, it's alcohol, it's tea. It's a format that we understand and that we can interact with each other. And so I'm really excited that we have, of course, launched our beverage product in the last year, and with a great partnership, and we've seen it really take off. And so, I think what really resonates with consumers is the trust in the brand, and then finding form factors that allow people to consume cannabis in measured ways with trust, without stigma.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you hit on the farm bill as well, and I think that really opened up a lot of more avenues to make beverage successful. So would love to hear your thoughts on how that impacted the industry.
Yeah. Well, the farm bill is interesting, right? Because, excuse me, it created that opportunity for the hemp industry to kind of start to grow and expand. And not just, excuse me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, and I have a.
No worries. It's that time of year.
It sure is. The farm bill really allowed for hemp to kind of develop from not only just the non-psychoactive cannabinoids, but also now the psychoactive cannabinoids in Delta 9, based on, the ruling of 0.03% weight in the product. So when that first happened, because of our brand and because of the trust of the consumers and because of Willie's reputation nationally as, a musical and cultural icon beyond cannabis, really that's the primary, right? We have always had the philosophy, and I stated this from first on, I'm kind of a Boy Scout, we're gonna be always clearly on the right side of legality. We're never going to push the gray area. We're going to let other people do that, whether that's from a regulatory fashion or a form factor or a factory, a formulation factor. We're going to be the ones that when we bring it out, consumers can feel confident that the time's right for that product. So we watched the hemp industry evolve, and then coming out of COVID, it really took off, and you had some good early pioneers that have done a great job sort of building that. And we realized that, we've always had a hemp line, non-psychoactive, when we realized there was an opportunity for us to expand into that psychoactive space. And then because of the change in the Farm Bill, it allows for companies to operate like a normal CPG company. So you can operate at scale. You can do centralized manufacturing, you can distribute, and you can work across state lines. And perhaps even more importantly, you can meet consumers where they shop, and you can meet them where they shop in a manner that is familiar to them, an in-cap promotion as an example, right? And or an aisle of choices and selections that are clearly demarcated. You're not driving to the wrong side of town, and this is the perception, right? And having to show ID to a guy with a guard and talk to somebody that seems unfamiliar to you, a bud tender, and pay taxes and all that. I mean, this is right where people shop. This is where the soccer mom picks up her Chardonnay and then grabs a bottle of Willie's. And what's really interesting about the hemp market as well, excuse me, is that the product is different, right? Hemp affects people differently, and I mean, cannabis in general has so multi-variants and such interesting ways that there's so many different ways that people can interact with the product, unlike, say, alcohol or coffee, which is fairly linear. So cannabis is really interesting, and hemp is just another example of that, right? One of the three areas of cannabis. And, it seems to be a little more accessible, a little bit quicker onset, a little bit, shorter half-life, a little less intensity. And that's perfect for people in this cultural moment who are looking for alternatives to alcohol or looking for alternatives to other substances and want to have a more healthier lifestyle. And so I think, it's perfect to have an opportunity to be able to open that market up to a new set of consumers that gets away from sort of just the traditional marijuana consumer and market. And what I'm really excited about is when, the politicians finally get clear that what we need to do is have a unified one plant market, and that's going to be in the best interest of the government, but particularly in the best interest of the consumer. Because right now, I think
Absolutely.
the consumer is the one that's kind of losing out.
Yeah, totally. Especially for the product that's not being sold on the regulated market. You just really don't know what you're getting.
Right, right. Well, right, exactly. And what's interesting about the Delta 9 beverages is they're really kind of being shepherded and cultivated by the alcohol industry and put through the
Mhm.
third tier distribution and managed. And so there's an element of familiarity and trust that is bred with that because consumers are there. But to your point, there's a whole playing field of other hemp products out there, and it's hard to know where the quality lies. Some companies are producing really high quality stuff, and a lot of people are throwing synthetic garbage into gas stations. So,
Yeah,
and again, that's not to the benefit of the consumer at all.
no, definitely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what do you see for the future of the Willie's product portfolio? I mean, obviously, beverages has been exploding. You mentioned before we got rolling a major milestone y'all hit. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the industry goes from here.
Yeah, well, and I think it's an interesting component. I mean, my hope is that we end up with a one plant industry and that we end up with sensible registration legislation. And that could happen either through descheduling or maybe through expansion of the farm bill, remains to be seen. But what I until that time, our plan is to continue to focus on the four core areas of the industry where we are, which is the regulated marijuana industry, both recreational and medical, and supporting medical patients with their needs as well as recreational growth. Non-psychoactive hemp products, and I'll come back to that in a second because I think that's really important. And then the THCA products, the Delta 9 products, which I think, as we said, provide a more accessible, structured, and regulated environment for consumers. And so we're going to continue to expand products and offerings in each of those areas. And what we're really looking to move in the hemp side is both the psychoactive and the non-psychoactive is functional wellness and
Mhm.
providing consumers an opportunity to bring in multitude of cannabinoids, but also other adaptogens and functional products within mostly beverages, but other delivery mechanisms as well, that allow consumers to see the benefit of the plant in a way beyond just getting high.
Yeah.
And our original research years ago showed that there was a huge segment of the consumer population that was cannabis tolerant, not interested in smoking cannabis or getting high, but interested in wellness and cannabinoids.
Mhm.
And there was that boom and crash before COVID of sort of the snake oil CBD is going to fix your flat
Yeah.
tire and everything else. And I think that's obviously toned down. And what we've seen in the last 4 years is the growth of functional products outside of cannabis.
Mhm.
And I think now the time is right for that combination. So we're really looking to take Willie's trusted brand and his trusted guidance on cannabinoids and cannabis, and then take that into a broader line of wellness products that frankly Willie uses and that other people use, and that have been a key part of his health and longevity.
Yeah, totally. And I completely resonate with your views on functional wellness and a return to looking into other cannabinoids. And I think one of the maybe silver linings of all the insanity that's come through the gray market and the uh, Delta 8 type products is that there's a renewed emphasis on quality and really understanding your supply chain. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that when we do get some guidance from the Trump administration, that they're going to look to rein in some of that untested, unsafe, frankly, product and really help consumers feel confident that the product they're getting is good again. Because I've had friends who don't know that they're buying product that's not the standard dispensary channel tested safe stuff, and puts them in a bad position, and then they're afraid of ever taking anything with cannabis again, which is totally understandable.
Right, right. Well, I think you bring up an interesting point too, because I do think that, and it's one of the exciting things in the cannabis industry, is because it is continuing to mature and we are getting more and more sophisticated players and money and product focus in anticipation of a normalization. But I think one of the nice things that the growth of the hemp industry and the psychoactive hemp industry so quickly has done is it's created a normalized marketplace where sort of free market ideas can really work. As I said, it's much more of a traditional CPG channel. So that attracts all sorts of people who understand CPG and are willing to play in that channel. That brings much more sophistication, much higher quality of people, and a much longer term focus on development of the industry. Because now all of a sudden it looks like a mainstream industry that's going to take its place with alcohol and others, not a niche industry that is, high risk that needs to be mitigated. And I think that change is really important for the long-term history of the industry, and also for the benefit of the consumers, because it raises the bar. To your point, you can't do it half baked, no pun intended. You have to do it to standard, or a top A player is going to come in the industry and eat your lunch. I mean, that's going to be where the standard's going to be. It's going to be like every other CPG and health and wellness product. We just got to get there. We're getting there slowly.
Getting there slowly, yeah, slower than we would have liked, but
Yeah,
hopefully, hopefully, better late than never, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the other hand, things are moving pretty quickly. I mean, when you look at how long, regulated industries, or you look at the alcohol industry's history or others, you know, I'd say it's moving pretty quickly. Unfortunately, we have a little bit, we've gotten a little stuck, and I'm hoping that it seems like we're going to get unstuck. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, but there's a lot of pressure building, and I think ultimately that's a good thing.
Yeah, ultimately, definitely a good thing.
Yeah, 80% of the consumers want this, and fascinating enough, on the hemp beverages, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but something like the high 30s report that when they start using cannabis-based beverages, they either reduce significantly or entirely their alcohol consumption.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, something you don't hear talked about very often is, alcohol's been around since the 1300s, thanks to the Trappist monks, right? But the reality is, it's a toxin that our body has to process, whereas everybody has a cannabinoid system in their body, and it's part of our regulatory system. It has nothing to do with using cannabis in any fashion at all, right? You can never touch the plant, and it'll play a key role in your life. So obviously, we've organically evolved with that system and those compounds. That doesn't mean everybody should be out, consuming lots of cannabis. That's a personal choice, but it does mean that cannabis and cannabinoids play a role in our overall health and regulatory system. And again, we just saw this with Trump's Truth Social post with Robert Kennedy, and I think that whole movement is exploring that area as well. So, which I think is good, because there just hasn't been any research, and it's long overdue.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, cannabis definitely helped me stop drinking as well. Like I've heard similar stories from a lot of folks. And you see with younger generations similar trends where they're getting way off alcohol. And I think, again, having access to legal, safe cannabis has helped that. I mean, certainly not without its own issues. Like we've talked about in the past, the industry has focused a lot on high potency THC and that sort of thing. So hopefully that normalizes. But all in all, I do think it's a positive trend.
I do too. And I think that last point you made, that's again symptomatic of not having a mature industry. If we had a mature national regulated industry, you'd have leaders in the industry that could be held accountable. And without a doubt, there needs to be more education for people under 21. And there needs to be more understanding of the classification, because, the difference between a 2.5 milligram microdose and a dab pen is akin to a wine spritzer and Everclear. And so there needs to be education and understanding so that consumers can benefit in a way that makes sense. Because to your point, I mean, people come in, they have a bad experience, and then it turns them off.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think it is about music and cannabis that have always gone together so nicely?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a great question. I mean, cannabis is the muse, right? I mean, if you go back to Ngorongoro Crater in Africa, 50 whatever thousand years ago, even really before we could communicate with a lot of words, we were dancing around the fire and celebrating our feasts and our deaths and the full moon and everything else. And music's always been the storyteller, that sort of ability to tell the story. And so I think that it plays a critical role in our lives, and it's a universal. So that's something that's always been the case. And then musicians have had for a long. I mean, there's the direct corollary in the United States of when it started to show up in the musical scene and jazz clubs, et cetera. But I think in general, if you look back through history and you look even through indigenous cultures, cannabis has been used as a spiritual plant and as a creative plant, and to harness different levels of creativity, spirituality, et cetera. And so I think it's always been a factor in that's where it evolved into the lineage And then when you look at the last 60, 70 years on consumer behavior, and you think about cannabis and you start to think about the 60s, really, and I growing up in the 80s, 90s, et cetera, and being around a lot of music, the only place that it was really free and legal and you were never really hassled at a concert, right? So cannabis was, I mean, you could be in Indiana and show up at a Grateful Dead show and there'd be cannabis, right? There's probably the only place there's cannabis in Indiana that day. But
Yeah.
that environment created a space where people could enjoy the plant and do it in sort of a way that was aligned to something that's all familiar to us, which is dancing and so forth. And then lastly, I think that music allows people to get out of themselves and out of their head. And I think cannabis, for many people, not for everybody, because it really isn't for everybody, but for the people that it resonates with, it allows some of that same ability to kind of experience an open creativity, to kind of release out of your own head a little bit, and then to kind of connect back into those primal vibes. And so I think all of those things bring cannabis and music together and have created this culture that is I mean, they're interwoven.
Totally. And do you have a perspective on why brands like Willie's have been successful and resonated with consumers, whereas other brands tied to musicians known for cannabis use really have fallen flat?
Yeah. Well, I do. And I think, there's an interesting misconception in my mind in general about marketing. The idea that it's sort of cynically viewed is that marketing is just an extension of sales. And the goal is to take a bunch of money and clever ideas and convince people to buy or want stuff that they may not necessarily want or buy. And certainly there's a component of that, but really that's not really what marketing is about. Marketing is about aligning people's needs and wants to authentic products that resonate and meet their needs and wants. And then when you do that and you find that core group of participants, then there's a whole nother group outside of that with whom they influence, which are considerers. And once you bring those considerers in, now you start to develop critical mass. And authenticity, turns out, is incredibly powerful. And it's not just powerful in terms of viewing it in the brand from the start, but in terms of how you interact with the consumers, because they will then take that authenticity and carry it forward for you. There's lots of different examples of that. And I think for us, where we were successful was really stopping and understanding two key components. One was Willie Nelson, because this is Willie Nelson, right? That's what we started as, and that's what we were intending to do. And so it's all about Willie and honoring and understanding his history and then his legacy as an advocate and a musician. So for us then, to create an authentic brand means we have to be authentically tied to that history and to that core component. And then to resonate and build products that resonate with consumers, to do that again in a way that is in line with our broader values and principles, right? And so for us, that was honoring Willie's legacy in farm aid, right? That was honoring his focus in sustainability and like trying to push on sustainable products. It was honoring his concept of not telling people what to do, but giving them choices, et cetera, and bringing that forward and bringing that into his products was the core component. And then to do that, really from disciplined messaging all the way through. So from the top of the funnel all the way down through conversion and return, and then from all of your out of home, if you're doing that, all the way down to your point of sale. And the other element in this industry, because it's kind of a funny industry, because it doesn't follow a lot of traditional retail, is there's the B2B component and the B2C. So because of the dispensary structure, you really have to work with the bud tender, who's your intermediary to the consumer, in a way that exceeds most CPG type environments. So really working to help the bud tender understand the authenticity of our approach and our product and our sourcing and how we were, wanted to build was critical, because they were the gatekeepers to the consumer, but also to sort of the culture, if you will, certainly early on. And then doing it in a way so that they have a sense of ownership, and then they can relay that to the consumer. So really working all the way through that. And what we learned early on was, you could spend a lot of money on out of home or other stuff, and try to follow traditional marketing. But this was a battle that was won at the countertop between the consumer and the bud tender, and you really had to make that connection, and you had to do it in a way that was real. And it was the factors that I mentioned before. His message, good product, good delivery.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't help that, or it doesn't hurt that we're our namesake is Willie Nelson. I mean, as I said before, he's, I mean, there's so many great musicians out there. There's people that have had, really good teams. People have different levels of success. But there's only one Willie Nelson.
There's only one.
Yeah. And I think that's, and we've been approached by a lot of artists, and I think there's a lot of ways artists can play in this space, but I don't think every artist should be a brand or a company.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for inviting me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about Longplay and to highlight, Willie and his history in the industry, and then all the great work done by all the people who have been involved in this for years. So.
Absolutely. If listeners want to get in touch with you, learn more about Longplay, or where they can find Willie's products, where should they go?
Sure. Well, they could send me an email directly if they like. They can send me an email to andrew@longplayusa.com.
Great.
Yeah. Excellent, Jordan. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Have a great day.
You too.